Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
On our Listener's Choice feature today, we're talking about AIPAC. We've spoken about it a number of times when we discuss some politicians in the US, especially in the context of South Africa, politicians who have been trying to get certain bills in Parliament to pass against South Africa, and how linked they are to AIPAC and the kind of funding they've received from AIPAC. It's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's a pro-Israeli lobby group which happens to fund a number of politicians in the US. So one listener has asked that we discuss what AIPAC is, how influential it is, and how it often works. And you'll know that it's often described as one of the most powerful lobbying groups in Washington. It's actually long-shaped how the U.S. engages with Israel and by extension, the wider Middle East region, right? In recent times, as opinion has been divided on America's role in that war on Gaza, questions about AIPAC's influence have also resurfaced. Even people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, this is someone who was a long-time Trump ally. She has stated that she does not want funding from AIPAC and has even been vocal in her criticism of the pro-Israel lobby group, accusing it of serving a foreign country, Israel, and trying to influence American politicians. So how exactly does this lobby group operate within the U.S. political system? Yeah? To what extent does it shape even congressional decisions, foreign aid and diplomatic positioning? And what does its enduring power reveal about the intersection of advocacy, money and policy making in America's democracy, especially in moments of war and moral complexity? Dr. Oscar Van Heerden is an international relations expert who's going to guide us through this conversation. But if you've got your own questions, you've got your own inputs, some thoughts you want to share around AIPAC, what you know, you can give us a call on 011-883-0702. Alternatively, send us your WhatsApps on 072-702-1702. Dr. Van Heerden, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement, and good morning to your listeners.
What exactly is AIPAC, and how did it rise to become such a powerful force in Washington?
Yeah, as you say, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee is an organization that, they started out being known as the Jewish lobby. But increasingly, there were those that were saying that referring to it as a Jewish lobby is anti-Semitic, precisely because there's a lot of American Jews and Jews globally that are not in support of AIPAC. And so the politically correct term these days are to say the Israeli lobby. So it is a pro-Israeli lobby, and they were established in 1954, so quite old. In fact, soon after the formation of the State of Israel, who, as you know, came into existence in 1948. So a mere 6 years later, AIPAC was formed and launched in the United States, and the explicit aim is to influence public opinion about Israel, to encourage material aid to the State of Israel by the United States government, and influence opinions and positions on Israel, in the United States polity. And so they developed over a long period and have become well established within the Washington, D.C. psyche.
So are there expectations on the politicians that AIPAC funds? Because often when we were, talking about, congressmen who were trying to push for this bill in the U.S. to review, diplomatic relations and relations with South Africa, when you look deeper, you see that they, some of them have received funding from AIPAC. And one of the things they had mentioned as the basis for the need for this review of relations is South Africa's support or South Africa's actions in the International Court of Justice, where they've accused Israel of genocide. So what I'm trying to figure out is, to what extent does AIPAC have influence, not just on the U.S. government, but on the politicians that it funds?
Yeah, no, look, the agenda of AIPAC is very clear. it is in full support of the settler colonial project that is happening in the Middle East, in Palestine, and it makes no excuses that it defends the state of Israel against all enemies perceived. And the way they do that is to influence politicians in the United States. They have gotten onto a very simple strategy, as I say, as far back as the 1950s, which is that the United States, as the most powerful hegemon globally, needs to be on their side and needs to bat for them. And the way they ensure that is by making sure that they fund, that they influence, that they assist young aspiring politicians on both sides of the aisle, by the way. They are bipartisan. They supported Hillary Clinton just like they supported Donald Trump. So they are not partisan. And they figured out that if we manage to have sufficient influence through our funding and through our assistance, we can then ensure that policy direction goes in a certain way, that certain decisions go in a certain way. And when there's countries like South Africa who openly decides to challenge the state of Israel and the Netanyahu government on the charge of genocide, because they have relations with the United States, AIPAC then comes into the equation and says, how do we influence American politicians in order to deal a blow on South Africa and South Africa-US relations? And that's what we're seeing playing out.
What happens when the politicians that AIPAC has funded begin to change their views about Israel? I gave an example earlier of Marjorie Taylor, who was a long-time Trump ally, who suddenly started talking about AIPAC and how she's refusing to be funded by them, because once you are funded by them, it's almost like you are locked in this expectation and responsibility to push for Israeli interests, even when Israel is not doing things that are right. I mean, we've seen even Donald Trump has been frustrated by Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, he's used the F word even before to express his frustrations. But even with that, for some reason, the U.S. will still continue to pass policies and aid that advances the interests of Israel. So can you even criticize Israel when you're funded by AIPAC? Can you even criticize AIPAC, or that will spell trouble for you from what you've seen in your experience?
It spells trouble for you. If you break ranks, if you criticize, if you become oppositional, then it means that you become a target, you become isolated, people disassociate from you, you don't get invited. Washington, D.C., as you can imagine, Clement, it's all about diplomacy, it's all about, engagements, networking, and so forth, and so on. And you simply get excluded from those things. You become isolated because you dare to go up against AIPAC. That, unfortunately, is the reality. And, of course, in Washington, because of the constituency-based system that they have, candidates and individual congressmen and women, senators, they all require money in order to remain relevant to their constituencies. And that money comes from AIPAC. And if you go against AIPAC, the money gets withdrawn. You find yourself isolated. You don't get funding for your next campaign, so you might not come back in your seat. They actively fund oppositional candidates because you're no longer one of their preferred ones, and they then fund that candidate to unseat you. So and there's a very interesting book that was written by two international relations scholars, Professor John Mearsheimer and Professor Stephen Walt. It came out roughly in the mid-2000s, 2008, 2009, where they talk about the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and the U.S. foreign policy, and how AIPAC is manipulating and influencing that policy to the best of the advantage of Israel.
So, looking ahead then, how might AIPAC's role evolve given the shifting, U.S. public opinion, the changing political dynamics, the current tensions, in the Middle East, and yes, Donald Trump has managed to somehow, advance a peace deal, the first phase of which was successful in some ways. We're still waiting to see if the second phase will be successful, given that it wasn't holding much over the last couple of, I think this past weekend, when there were people that were still killed. So I'm trying to figure out then what happens when things change, or is AIPAC so advanced that, as you said, it's able to preempt the changes? As you say, they don't just fund Republicans. So they could very well, when they see that there are shifting dynamics in political support, and then they rush over to the Democrats and they start funding them, knowing that the president is likely to come from there. And then once that president comes in, then they have some level of control and influence over them. How do they keep on managing the shifting dynamics in the U.S.?
Well, yeah, no, that's a very good question, Clement. They keep very, very stringent tabs. They are very much in the milieu of what's happening in Washington, D.C. They keep their finger on the pulse. As you rightfully point out, they know exactly when a president is going to go in a particular direction. Now, usually, we all know that the President of the United States is able to dictate to Israel what to do, when to do it, what not to do, and so on. It always has a stranglehold on Israel and the Israeli government, because huge amounts of foreign aid comes from the United States to Israel. Huge amounts of military equipment and defense systems are transferred from the United States to Israel. And so those are levers that the President of the United States can use in order to make sure that Israel toes the line. Now, in the case of Trump, firstly, more than $100 million came from one a person in the U.S., a Jewish woman, who was very clear. She's pro-Israel, she's pro-Zionism, she hates the Palestinians, and so on and so forth. And so already, as he was coming in, he was compromised. That's number one. Number two, over the years, this is the first time that AIPAC now has a majority of their candidates in Senate. And so when it comes to legislation, when it comes to laws that has to be passed by Congress, it has to go through Senate, and AIPAC now has the majority of candidates in the Senate. In other words, if there's any legislation that needs to happen, so for example, I'll give you an example with regards to South Africa. The AGOA trade agreement, as you know, it came to an end at the end of September. Now Congress needs to renew it. It has to go through Senate. And because we have the case against Israel in the ICJ, AIPAC is now putting pressure on their candidates in Senate to say, don't continue with AGOA. Teach South Africa and the Africans a lesson. Similarly, we are trying to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement. As you know, Minister Parks Tau is busy with his team. And it is AIPAC, among others, that are putting undue pressure on legislators and on congressmen and women to try and frustrate the trade agreement with the South Africans. So there's a lot of toing and froing, and Trump, at every turn, when he was supposed to rein Netanyahu in because of the genocide that's unfolding in Gaza and what's going on in the West Bank, he has not done so because, as I say, he's compromised, and that's besides the fact from a Judeo-Christian movement. Remember, Trump is also quite religious, and he also appeals to that gospel belt who all support the Zionists for their own biblical reasons.
What happens though? Because, one of the things I realized when I had the opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. at the very same time that our president was there for a meeting with Trump, and I had a few meetings, with a few people and a few sources before that meeting in the Oval Office. And what I picked up was that what works, and like on the streets of Washington, D.C., lobby groups are what really runs Washington, D.C. There's even a street there where it's just a street, it's offices and buildings of all these lobby groups. So I suppose the question is, do we speak of AIPAC as if it's the only group that's lobbying politicians, or are there other groups that, lobby politicians to push for their own interests that may be as powerful as AIPAC?
Usually, Clement, that's a very good question. Usually the lobby groups are issue-specific groups. It might be environmental lobby groups. It might be lobby groups that are anti-war. It might be lobby groups that are anti-tobacco and substance abuse and so forth. Very rare do you have a lobby group like AIPAC that's sole focus is the promotion of a particular country, which is Israel. Now, one of the criticisms perhaps to the South African government is that we don't have a particular lobby group within the Washington, D.C. Environment, not only to promote trade, not only to promote good relations and tourism and so on and so forth, but also when it comes to these very contentious issues, global issues, Russia and Ukraine, what's happening with the trade war with China. It all affects South Africa and our bottom line, our situation back home. What is it that we are doing, not only through our ambassador and the team that's there in the embassy, but do we have a particular group of people that is lobbying all manner of legislatures, senators, congressmen and women, the Black Caucus, etc., like we used to have during the apartheid days?
Yeah. Let's go to some WhatsApp voice notes on 072 702 1702.
Morning, Clement. The truth is that AIPAC owns American politics, and they have done so for the last half a century. Anyone who denies that doesn't know anything about American politics. All the American presidents were beholden to AIPAC, and that's why it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. They all sing the same tune when it comes to Israel. Why is it that Barack Obama went in saying, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix that? When he actually got into the White House, he found his hands were tied because he was beholden to AIPAC. Now, the tides are actually turning in the U.S. The new generation, the baby boomers are going out. The new generation is now realizing that, hang on, Israel is not what we thought it was. It's actually a genocidal apartheid state who is becoming a pariah of the world. And so the politicians are now suddenly changing their tune. All these people who are now saying, I don't want the AIPAC money, have taken the AIPAC money for years, decades, if not decades. So AIPAC basically owns American politics at the moment.
Yeah, Dr. Van Heerden, suppose the question there is what this listener mentions around the younger generation, the younger American voters, and even Jewish communities. How do they view AIPAC today? And is there evidence of some kind of generational shift in support or in criticism?
Yeah, no, definitely. There is a shift that's happening. We see it on the university campuses and the draconian clampdown on those that are protesting. And I think there's two elements to it, Clement. On the one hand, the caller is correct. Young people are beginning to see the true Israel in terms of what it's doing to the Palestinian people. Any progressive-minded youngster who wants to have a fairer and a just world will know that there's a reason why apartheid South Africa ended in the 1990s, and that the settler colonial apartheid state called Israel must also come to an end. So there is that element definitely. But I think more importantly, for the average American youngster, Gen Z, is the fact that they are asking the question, why should we suffer at the expense of Israel? Why should our taxpayer monies be sent to Israel as if Israel is a 51st, an additional state of the United States? Because as I said earlier, huge amounts of aid money goes to Israel every year. I mean, just in this last period with the genocide in Gaza, the wars against Lebanon, against Syria, against Iran, and of course the bombing in Qatar, all of that, the United States consistently gave them money to underscore and to support those wars because those wars cost money. And so over the last 2 years, we're talking of hundreds of billions of US dollars that have left the United States coffers in support of Israel. And the Gen Z generation is saying, why should we hold 3 to 4 jobs just to keep our heads above water when we're sending all those billions to Israel? What's in it for me? And I think that's why there's a mood change that's beginning to take shape in the United States of America.
Yeah, one of the things that have just been shocking to me was just even listening to the presidents of the U.S., whether, as recent as Joe Biden or Kamala Harris when she stepped in, even Donald Trump, even at moments where they are so frustrated by Israel or by Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, the simple thing is a two-state solution where America says, even from Joe Biden's time, where they were like, we believe in this. This is a two-state solution. This is what's going to resolve this. And Israel doesn't want that. But for some reason, America still sends billion rands in funding, in military aid to Israel, even when Israel is opposing America's view or suggestion on how this war can end in the Middle East. It's just shocking. I mean, the few times where you see them trying to criticize Israel, it's like little kids who are scared to go after that one kid because that kid is not going to play with them anymore. It's not going to bring their soccer ball to play with them anymore. Or because the parents of that kid are so powerful, that they themselves are going to end up being in trouble. Like they're always, it's like eggshells, walking on eggshells. Even when they can see clearly that what Israel had done, instances where they were killing health workers, and they come and apologize and says, oops, sorry. Oh, they killed kids. Oops, sorry. They killed journalists. Oops, sorry. And it gets to a point where no president with a heart actually is able to defend that. And still, even in that defense, they are so scared to call out Israel. They're so scared. And now, with what Dr. Oscar Van Heerden has explained, it really makes sense, doesn't it? Thank you so much for making time for us. Dr. Oscar Van Heerden is an international relations expert.